Hundreds of thousands of videos are uploaded to YouTube every single day, and most of them will never be seen by more than a handful of people. But buried deep within the platform are disturbing videos that perhaps were never meant to be discovered. The subreddit Deep into YouTube is a community dedicated to exploring that digital void, uncovering videos that otherwise would have remained forgotten forever. And sometimes, what they find is far darker than anyone could have imagined. That's exactly what happened in January 2025, when a member of the community shared a post linking to a disturbing video uploaded to YouTube back in 2007, providing almost no context at all. The video, titled 424242, begins with old camcorder footage dated October 12, 1995. At first, nothing seems unusual. The camera is simply pointed at a snow-covered truck. But just over 30 seconds later, something shocking happens. Someone climbs onto the back of the truck and lifts a tarp-like cover, revealing the lifeless body of a person lying in the truck bed. The only context appears in the opening text, which reads, "The tragedy of Ilton" in Russian, and in the closing message which states, "This is how Ilton died." The video's description is just as vague, containing only a single sentence, "This is how it happens." As you would expect, the comments were initially filled with confusion. In one of the oldest comments, someone asked the uploader if they could provide more information about the incident. Staying true to the same pattern of cryptic replies, the uploader responded with only one sentence. It would take too long to explain the details. At first glance, it's tempting to assume this is some kind of ARG. After all, the video has every hallmark of that style of content: grainy footage, an unsettling atmosphere, absolutely no context, a mysterious and seemingly meaningless title, and vague responses from the person who uploaded it. But I can assure you, every part of this story is real. After digging deeper into the uploader's channel, we found a large collection of other videos, most of them completely unrelated to this incident. Even so, among all that footage are a handful of videos that appear to have been recorded with the same camera, around the same time as the one we just watched. Together, those videos tell a disturbing story, offering a first-hand glimpse into what happened in one of the most haunting towns in all of Russia. During the mid-20th century, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was at its peak. Tensions were extremely high, and the USSR was rapidly expanding its industries in an effort to compete with the West on every front. Then, in the late 1940s, the Soviet Union caught a lucky break. Massive deposits of tin and tungsten were discovered in a remote region of Russia's Far East. It was the perfect opportunity to expand its industrial presence. The Soviet government wasted no time transforming the area into a mining town known as Ilton. Enormous amounts of money and planning went into the project. The town received heavy government subsidies that funded housing, infrastructure, and public services for the workers. Maintaining the settlement was expensive, but the valuable minerals extracted from the mines made the investment worthwhile. From the 1960s through the early 1980s, the town flourished. It had mines, ore processing plants, an airport, a hospital, schools, a movie theater, and cultural centers. It wasn't just a place to work, it was a real town where people grew up, went to school, raised families, and planned for the future. But there was one enormous problem. The town depended entirely on continuous funding from the Soviet Union. Without that support, its economy simply couldn't survive on its own. That meant if mining ever stopped being profitable, or if the Soviet government cut off its funding for any reason, the entire local economy would collapse. And you can probably guess what happened next. By the late 1980s, the Cold War was drawing to a close, and the Soviet Union could no longer keep pace with the United States, economically or politically. That crisis ultimately led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. When the Soviet Union collapsed, virtually all funding for Ilton disappeared overnight. Without government support, the town's economy quickly began to unravel. Those with enough money managed to leave, but the people who stayed behind found themselves trapped in crushing poverty, surrounded by living conditions that grew worse with each passing year. By the mid-1990s, everything was falling apart. The town had become a scene of complete devastation, and that's exactly where the mysterious videos found on this YouTube channel begin. The earliest recording connected to these events takes us back to August 1995. As the opening title card explains, We are in the village of Umgema. By this point, Ilton wasn't just struggling, it was literally collapsing. Nearly 4 years had passed since the fall of the Soviet Union. 4 years without investment, without maintenance, and without the resources the town once depended on. The few people still living in Ilton were fighting every single day just to survive. Despite the region's total abandonment, those who remained hadn't been completely forgotten. Local governments occasionally organized missions to deliver supplies and evacuate the last residents still trapped there. It's impossible to know exactly who the people in these videos are, but judging by the circumstances, they were likely part of one of these government supply or evacuation missions. Their objective was simple: reach Ilton and provide assistance to the people who still refused to leave the dying town. But in reality, that mission was anything but easy. One of the greatest challenges was simply getting there. The only land route into Ilton was a long gravel road built during the 1950s, known as the Ilton Highway. The men seen in these videos traveled along that road, passing through the village of Amgiema as they pushed deeper toward the abandoned town. The journey went relatively smoothly until they encountered the most dangerous obstacle along the route. At one point, a massive river completely cut across the road. To continue, they had no choice but to cross it. This was the true breaking point for anyone trying to reach Ilton. Anyone who managed to get across the river had a relatively clear path for the rest of the journey. The footage reveals just how dangerous that crossing really was. We see vehicles overturned in the water, people stranded in the middle of the current, and rescue teams forced to use boats to reach those who had become trapped. After an exhausting struggle, several vehicles finally make it across, but not without consequences. The final caption reads, "This is how our drivers were injured," which strongly suggests these recordings were made by the very same person who eventually uploaded them to YouTube. Several comments left by the uploader himself only reinforce that conclusion. These weren't random clips he had found online and re-uploaded. He was actually there. He lived through every moment of it. We already talked about the next recording at the beginning of this video, but placing it in the proper timeline makes it much easier to understand what was really happening. So now, let's move forward to October 1995. By that time of year, temperatures in the region had already dropped to brutally cold levels. With much of the town's infrastructure no longer functioning, the arrival of winter pushed the remaining residents into pure survival mode. This footage brutally illustrates just how catastrophic the situation in Ilton had become. This was no longer just an economic crisis. People were dying. There is no definitive explanation for why a body was lying in the back of that truck, but there is one theory that seems especially plausible. The victim may simply have been transported somewhere else. With the town's essential services collapsing, hospitals, emergency crews, and even the systems responsible for burials had stopped functioning properly. Because of that, the body may have been one of many being transported elsewhere so the person could receive a proper burial. As horrifying as this footage is, it was only the beginning of what these videos would reveal about the inside of that forgotten town. By 1996, most of the people who had once called Ilton home had either died or been evacuated. The massive apartment buildings that had once housed hundreds of families were now occupied by only a handful of people. Then, on a freezing night in January, the few residents who remained were simply trying to survive another bitterly cold evening. Wrapped in blankets, they did everything they could to make it through one more night, until the silence was shattered. A fire broke out inside one of the residential buildings. The flames spread rapidly, waking everyone at once. Panic erupted as residents rushed through hallways filled with smoke and unbearable heat, desperately trying to escape before it was too late. But once they made it outside, they were met by another enemy, the brutal cold of the Russian winter. The video captures the chaos of that night in its entirety. As the building burns, you can hear residents talking in the background, confused, frightened, and desperately trying to figure out what they were supposed to do next. But the truth was, no one knew. So how did an entire town fall into this level of destruction? The answer lies in the abandonment itself. By this point, nearly all of Ilton's infrastructure had been left to decay. That included one of the most essential systems for surviving in such a harsh climate, central heating. Without it, the already unforgiving winters became almost impossible for the people who stayed behind. Desperate to keep warm, many families began relying on wood stoves, electric heaters, and any other source of heat they could find. But that created an entirely new problem. The building's electrical systems had never been designed to handle that kind of demand. The outcome was inevitable. Constant electrical overloads sparked fires throughout the town, including the one you're seeing in this footage. The video ends with haunting scenes recorded the following morning. Charred debris scattered across the frozen ground. Icy winds blowing through the burned-out remains of the building. No rescue crews, no emergency response, no help arriving. The situation was no longer just bad, it felt completely hopeless. When an entire town is abandoned by its own government, resentment is bound to grow. And that's exactly what the final 3 videos in this series capture. By the time these recordings were made, Ilton had been falling apart for years, and the remaining residents wanted answers. The footage appears to show a public meeting between the townspeople and representatives of the local government or regional administration. According to the description of the first video, those officials were named Izizakov and Fedorenko. Their mission was to calm the residents and explain what would happen next. But speaking was far easier than convincing. Many of those people had spent their entire lives in Ilton. They built their homes there, they raised their families there, and now they were being told that everything was over. As if that weren't devastating enough, most of them would receive little to no meaningful compensation or assistance. The atmosphere inside the meeting is incredibly tense. People shout over one another, voices filled with anger, frustration, and desperation. Arguments erupt from every corner of the room. Accusations begin flying toward the authorities. Some residents claim that the money meant for the town had been stolen or misused by the very officials standing in front of them. And judging by the footage, even the government representatives seem to have very few answers. The overwhelming feeling in the room is a mix of anger, grief, and desperation. For these people, this wasn't just the end of a town, it was the end of an entire way of life. These were some of the last moments ever recorded of Ilton and the people who called it home. Not long afterward, the town's population rapidly declined until it reached 0. Some people held on longer than others. A handful of residents remained there alone far longer than anyone would have thought possible, struggling to survive in complete isolation. But in the end, the town's fate had already been sealed. By the late 1990s, the Russian government officially declared Ilton unfit for permanent human settlement. After that, the town all but disappeared from public discussion. Today, Ilton stands completely abandoned. All that remains are the silent ruins of a town that once had a thriving economy, families, schools, hospitals, and an entire community that called it home. The deserted site is still occasionally visited by urban explorers who capture haunting photographs of what remains. When you watch these videos without any context, they seem deeply disturbing. But once you understand the story behind the footage and imagine what the person behind the camera was experiencing while recording it, the feeling that stays with you is no longer fear. It's sadness. This was the place where countless people experienced the most important moments of their lives. This is where they grew up, went to school, worked, fell in love, and raised their families. And it's also where many of them endured unimaginable suffering. The town is gone, but the stories of the people who lived there are not. And that's only possible because someone chose to document those events while they were still unfolding. Thanks to that YouTube channel, one of history's most brutal, heartbreaking, and often forgotten chapters has been preserved for future generations. Not as a legend, not as a conspiracy, but as the real-life testimony of an entire town's collapse.